Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig. It's the first Monday of the month, it's the next issue of Spawn, so let's zoom in and take a closer look. Here we see issue number 10 of Spawn, first published in May of 1993. On the cover, it is mostly black and white, except for this small square which highlights the character Cerebus, created by Dave Sim. I should point out, this is kind of a joke. All of the issues of Cerebus were printed in black and white, which is why his reaction is, gah, color. I don't know if this is his first appearance ever in color. I couldn't find anything on the internet that lists a specific date for this character's first appearance in color, although it is definitely not his only appearance in color. I know he made an appearance in Ninja Turtles at some point. He was colored in that. And he may have made other color appearances in promotional materials and or covers of collected editions. I'm not entirely certain. I don't know the most amount of information about Cerebus as a character. But again, just a clever little joke here. I'd also like to point out that those of you who have been watching all of my Spawn videos may be thinking to yourself, hey, wasn't Spawn number 1 printed in May of 1992? And if so, doesn't that mean that this should be issue 13? Yes, is the answer to both of those questions. Todd, of course, like all of the image creators that founded the company, was terrible at meeting deadlines. And to be fair to him, he was better at meeting deadlines than everyone else who founded the company, as he managed to publish 9 issues in the first year of Image's existence, whereas everybody else was like between 2 and 4 issues, I think, altogether. It was not a lot of deadlines being met in that first 12 months. Story, Dave Sim. Art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ollie Optics. We see here on the first page 2 images of Spawn. One saying I am Spawn, the other saying I am not Spawn. Most of this issue is told from a narrative standpoint, more so than through character dialogue. If you'll remember, at the end of issue number 9, Spawn picked up Angela's lance and was basically zapped out of existence. If you haven't read or watched my video on Spawn number 9, I suggest you do so before watching this video, because it'll help this video make more sense to you. Maybe not total sense, but more sense, because this is kind of a weird issue of the book. We see here an image of a skull, an image of the Violator, an image of Wanda and Cyan. However, they don't look the same as they normally would. We also see an image of Spawn's heart after the Violator has ripped it out, and a lot of catch-up narrative that is explaining sort of what's happened in the past 9 issues of Spawn up until this point. On the next page, we see at the top of the header, it says, I am not Spawn, and we get this conglomerated image of a lot of characters that we have seen up until this point. We have Sam and Twitch, Mabulja, Tony Twistelli, Overt Kill, Al Simmons himself, and what would appear to be Wanda, however, she is white, and we also see the casket of Al Simmons as it sits above the grave that it would be lowered into at his funeral. This narration goes on to talk a lot about how this person knows all of the ins and outs of these characters, why they have nicknames, what their motivations are, what will happen to Spawn when he does eventually go to the grave of Al Simmons and dig up the casket to open it and see what will be inside. We also see here on the next page, the narrator continues to talk about how they know every inch of the alleyways that move through all of New York City, and every inch of the tower in hell that is apparently the home of the Violator, as it's stated in this narration, and that they know what's on every single floor except for floor number 7. However, the reason for not knowing what's on floor number 7 is not explained in this issue. We then find out that this character, who is not Spawn, but clearly looks like Spawn, and it seems as though it's from Spawn's point of view that we're seeing this, has unlimited power and is able to teleport at a moment's will and can use their power as much as they like, and faces none of the restrictions that Spawn does, and then uses its power, their power, to open this door. After which they go inside and find a room filled with a line of men who have bags tied over their heads and their hands bound behind their back. This not Spawn then looks down the hallway to see a light flashing and doesn't want to look and see what it is, but is also afraid to look away because they want to learn the answers to the questions that they have. We then see on this 2-page splash, which by the way looks pretty cool, a image reminiscent of what we saw in a black and white sketch in the last issue when Spawn woke up and was dreaming about this moment before having his encounter with Angela. As we see here, there is a large caged doorway on the side of the wall with the hands of many superheroes from Marvel and DC reaching out towards Spawn, asking that Spawn please help them, that there is injustice being done against them, and Spawn realizing that all of these characters are the reason that he exists, as he is basically existing off of their past successes, but also realizing that they're trapped and that they need help, as we see Spawn yell out no, and we also see the line of men with the bags tied over their heads and their hands bound behind them up against the opposite wall. In an attempt to help all of these imprisoned heroes, this not Spawn decides to utilize his unlimited power and unleashed a giant blast trying to blow open the cage that is holding them all captive. However, despite having unlimited power, the cage is unaffected, as his attack was completely incapable of doing any damage to the bars that are holding them. So these imprisoned heroes then decide that Spawn should take all of their combined powers to use along with his to free them. And they keep telling him, take our powers, take our powers. And Spawn then absorbs the powers of all of these characters to utilize in an attempt to free them. Then, finally, Spawn is approached by none other than Superman, though, legally not Superman, as Todd didn't have the rights to use any of the copyrighted logos and or names of any of the superheroes owned by DC or Marvel. And then this not Superman tells this not Spawn to take all of his power as well, so that Spawn will have the power of all of the superheroes combined. Spawn does so willingly and takes on everything, realizing that for as powerful as he thought he was, his power was nothing in comparison to the combined powers of all of these heroes, as we see it being represented in a sense of the galaxy itself existing within Spawn's own body. Spawn then realizes what he must do as he focuses this energy to once again try to free all of these captive heroes. On the next page, we see this 2-page splash image where the Spawn, aka not Spawn, releases all of the energy and power that was given to him by the other superheroes. Unfortunately, it once again has no effect on the bars, none whatsoever. And despite his best efforts, he was unable to free them from their prison. Then after the dust settles, we see that Spawn is now being confronted by not Spawn, is being confronted by this not Violator, as we see a woman's body but has the head of the Violator wearing a blindfold, carrying scales, somewhat representing the form given to justice in the American legal system. How we also see here that the scales on one side are covered with quote-unquote all of the world's money and riches, and the other side of the scales has a black, bloody heart. And this not violator continues to taunt Spawn, aka not Spawn, saying that he failed, he failed, he failed. And we also see that the dress that this not violator is wearing is made up of billions of dollars. Then suddenly this creature disappears, and this not Spawn is back in the tunnel with the men wearing hoods who are all weeping and the cage. We then see this not legally Superman say one word, Doomsday. I should point out, this issue came out a few months after the Death of Superman storyline was printed. That story was met with a lot of mixed reviews. Some people thought it was a really cool direction to take the Superman story in, to take away some of the perceived invincibility that Superman had always been given up until that point. Other people criticized it as just really a shameless money grab and a way for DC to, increase the sales of Superman books, which, by the way, they did. I can understand both sides of it. Superman did need a shakeup in his story at that time, but it does feel a little bit, I guess, forced in a way, looking back at it now, especially knowing that they had no intention of keeping Superman quote unquote dead for, a super extended amount of time. How could they? I mean, he's basically the shining beacon face of the entirety of the DC comic line. But, it was cool to see that Todd decided to use this moment, this shake-up moment in the history of comics, to kind of illustrate a point of how, no character was safe and no hero was safe from being, killed or cast aside at any time when that was needed for an industry shakeup or perhaps an industry payday for a particular publisher. However, on the next page, Spawn's attention is grabbed by none other than Cerebus as the book switches to black and white to illustrate that they are moving into Cerebus's world, if you will. Spawn doesn't want to go with Cerebus, as he states that he has to save these characters. However, Cerebus informs Spawn, aka not Spawn, that this is impossible, that it can't be done. Cerebus has been here for 15 years. This is a reference to the fact that the Cerebus comic had been going for 15 years at this point. Spawn then asks, who are they? Cerebus tells him that they are superheroes. Spawn then asks who all the hooded men are and why they're upset. Cerebus informs Spawn that these are the creators who sold all of said heroes, and that it's best not to think about it. They then move through Cerebus's hometown as Cerebus continues to explain what's going on to an extent and where they are. Spawn then asks Cerebus why, or if everything is gray. Cerebus tells him it's technically black and white and gray. And Spawn seems quite baffled, looking around, confused, but then he is jolted by the exclamation of his name. Here on the next page, we see that the world has transformed back into one of color as they stand outside of a large house. They walk into the house. Spawn mentions that it's quite beautiful. Cerebus says, yeah, welcome home. Spawn is surprised that this is his home. Cerebus goes on to describe all of the things that are in this home that belongs to Spawn, how grand it is, and that he has about 1 million hockey cards, how he has a wife who is a teacher that will be home soon, and then informs him that he's going to love this as they open the door to one of the bedrooms to reveal a young girl who is Spawn, aka not Spawn's daughter. This is overwhelming to Spawn as we see him begin to cry. Cerebus tells him to let him out. He then proclaims to ask how this is possible. Cerebus basically tells him it's because his creator is still with him and didn't sell him, and it's as simple as that. On the next page, we see Spawn enjoying playing with his daughter, and Cerebus tells Spawn that the girl's name is Cyan. Spawn states that everything feels like a dream like this. Cerebus then tells him that he'll get used to it. Spawn proceeds to try and ask Cerebus some more questions when they're interrupted by a phone call. Spawn answers the phone, realizes that it's for Cerebus, and hands him the phone. Cerebus begins to make plans to go meet someone after watching a hockey game as Spawn continues to play with his daughter. Cerebus then tells Spawn that as much as he appreciates the invite to stay, that he believes 4 is a crowd and he'll need to get moving. Spawn then proceeds to thank Cerebus for everything he's done. Cerebus says not to mention it and to tell Wanda he said hi, and then Spawn replies that he will do so as we see Cerebus then disappear. We then see Spawn exiting the child's room as we hear a click-clack and Spawn's wife yelling up to him, asking how his day was. He says that it was good and that he thinks he had a bad dream, but that everything's better now as we see him walk down the stairs to meet his wife holding his daughter. And then we see Spawn is a trademark and copyright of Todd McFarlane, and Cerebus is a trademark and copyright of Dave Sim forever, illustrating that the two of them both own the rights to and have full control over the use of their artistic work. We then see on the next page Image Info, which is just a breakdown of upcoming comics that are going to be printed by Image. Nothing special there, same as always. Here on the next 2 pages, we get the Spawning Ground, and I will say that this month's Spawning Ground is almost entirely critical of not only Todd McFarlane, but the entirety of Image Comics and the other creators who are publishing through Image Comics. Some of the criticism is deserved, although some of it seems a little odd. The one letter in particular really tries to go after basically everyone who is working at Image, criticizing their artwork, their storytelling, whatnot. It's cliche at this point to criticize Rob Liefeld's artwork. It's been done to death, even if it is deserved to some extent. Though, to be fair, whether or not you like somebody's artwork is really more of, your own taste versus necessarily how quote unquote good they are or not. It also made a point to really criticize the story of Pitt, which I found to be odd. I mean, to be fair, again, Pitt isn't necessarily the most in-depth story in the world. However, it's not trying to be either. Pitt is more of an action-oriented comic with a lot of action sequences taking over the pages and not a ton of dialogue. And not every comic needs a ton of dialogue. I think it's important to remember that each story is, dependent on the type of book the creators are trying to produce. Some creators want to produce a very in-depth, engaging narrative, and other creators are trying to produce, a really fun, over-the-top, action-oriented thing. Some are trying for comedy. It's really kind of wide open. And to defend the person writing the letter to an extent, this is something kind of new as a whole where people are easily exposed, I should say, to creators being able to just do whatever they want with their comics and not have, oversight from executives like they would have in Marvel or DC. And then those comics reach a nationwide mainstream audience. Prior to this, independent comic books wouldn't have had a huge reach for the most part. It would have just been, in major markets or regional markets, depending on how much money the creators had to, get circulation of their book out to the public. So it could have been a mix of that and, a mix of just anger that these people were no longer working at the companies that this person liked to read. But I found it interesting that Todd would take such a large bit of space, because it is a rather long letter, in the letter section to print a letter that is so critical of himself and also the other image creators. And I appreciate the fact that, he wasn't just printing constant praise about his book and the books of other creators in this section. Here on the next page, we see that Todd has devoted 2 full pages to printing fan art that was submitted into his letters. I thought this was really cool. It's a nice thing to do to allow the fans to get their art put into a nationally published book. And, we see a lot of the different image characters who had appeared up until this point. Most of them are of Spawn. Obviously, it is Todd McFarlane that they were sending these images to. But we also see Savage Dragon, Shadowhawk, Pit, several others. It's a cool little thing. I appreciate that Todd was willing to do this. On the next page, we see a few more of the fan-submitted artwork that got printed in this issue, and then we see a public service announcement from Ollie Optics featuring none other than Armature. For those of you who don't know, Armature is essentially the mascot of Ollie Optics, and it says here, the better you draw, the better we color. Basically, they're using their character as a means to encourage more people to hone in their craft and get better at, illustration. And it's funny because Armature's not really a comic book character. He is just a mascot for a company. But if you read any number of issues of Wizard magazine in the early 90s, it's almost certain at some point you came across Armature in that or other Image published titles. On the next page, we get an advertisement for Image Gets Stupid, where it's just kind of Image's version of Mad Magazine, if you will. And then we see an advertisement / mail away form to order Spawntastic apparel, where Todd was printing up t-shirts that had images of not just his creations, but the creations of other Image alum. It is unfortunate that this was still in the time period where you had to use mail away forms, and if you wanted to order any of these t-shirts, you were going to have to mar one of the pages in this comic book. But I had totally forgotten about Todd having this apparel line back then. It was kind of funny just to go back and see this advertisement. On the next page, we then see an advertisement for the Shadowhawk Out of the Shadows trade paperback, which was a collection of the original Shadowhawk miniseries. And on the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement that I found to be pretty impressive, I should say, for gay comics. These are, I don't really know much about them. From what I can tell, they're essentially, one-off issues where each book either is a collection of stories or a self-contained story, but all revolving around gay characters and, gay subject matter, which it's important to keep in mind that this advertisement is being run on a nationwide publication in 1993. There is absolutely no way that Marvel or DC would have even considered running an ad for this book. It really kind of speaks to, how ahead of the curve Todd was in, taking an advertisement for something that was a lot more controversial 30 years ago than it is today. It's nothing for Marvel or DC to have, pro LGBTQ plus characters existing within their books. But 30 years ago, this was not the norm. You were not going to see either one of these companies celebrating gay characters or gay comic books at that time. And it's pretty impressive that Todd was really willing to step out on a limb here in just running an ad, as the acceptance of gay people in America was not that high in 1993. This is a pre Will and Grace world where, you know, there was still a lot of animosity that was pretty mainstream towards the gay community. It was really kind of surprising to go back and see that in 1993, Todd was like, yeah, it's fine. I'll totally run your ad on these gay comic books. And, you know, it's commendable in a lot of ways. I was really impressed when I saw this ad. And that was Spawn issue number 10. And it's definitely a strange issue for sure. The short version is that in this issue, Spawn and Cerebus are acting as comic book representations of their creators, Dave Sim and Todd McFarlane, and trying to kind of give a narrative that explains the problems that they had with the comic book industry as it existed in 1993, or the early 90s as a whole, I should say, where creators had no control over the characters that they were creating for these monstrous companies, and how the stories were just, in many circumstances, being put out to, you know, an audience just for the sake of making money. Decisions were being made completely based on money and not whether or not it necessarily made sense to the story as a whole. And also the kind of the prison that many creators and artists and writers found themselves in, where if they wanted to work in the industry, they were going to have to do it under the rules that Marvel and DC were creating, and that, you know, they were able to make a living doing it, and they were able to support themselves and their families doing it, but at the cost of their own artistic expression in many circumstances, which again is going back into what I mentioned in my Spawn number 1 video as being one of the prime motivators for the creation of Image Comics as a whole, where it now offers a space where these creators can create how they like, write how they like, draw how they like, and take the characters in the directions that they choose, instead of being, you know, micromanaged by, you know, executives. But, you know, like I said, it's a weird book, but I feel like it's done okay in the way that it's presented. But these are just my opinions. Your opinions may differ. You may hate this issue. You may think it was terrific. But either way, it's totally okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.